I saved his life twice, once on the side of the road, and once when he tried to end it himself. He thanked me by destroying everything I'd built. Some nights, I still wonder if I should have let him die. 3 weeks later, Emily called me into her office. Her desk was covered in paperwork. The hospital board had officially approved the new emergency response protocols I'd helped draft after my case hit national news. From now on, doctors could provide life-saving care outside the hospital without fearing legal fallout if something went wrong. The guidelines covered everything: how to document the scene, how to get consent when possible, and even how to protect yourself while helping. She pointed out a section we'd added after my ordeal: advice on recording incidents for evidence. We'd learned the hard way that Josh's video, meant to hurt me, had actually saved me. The next morning, I met Lisa for coffee. She scrolled through photos of Chris at law school, study groups, mock trials, his left hand tapping away on a keyboard with a modified stylus while his right rested in his lap. He'd chosen civil rights law, determined to fight discrimination in healthcare. Lisa said he kept my business card on his desk as a reminder that doing the right thing matters, even when people hate you for it. That weekend, I deep cleaned my car for the first time in months. Pulling the seats out, my fingers brushed something small wedged deep in the track. One of my mother's prayer beads, the one that must have rolled away when Josh threw them. The blood stain was dark now, but the bead was intact. I took it home and threaded it into my new set, its scarred surface standing out among the clean ones. The hospital marked the 1-year anniversary with a symposium on discrimination in healthcare. Chris agreed to speak about the dangers of silence. I spoke about treating every patient, regardless of their opinions about you. Emily refused to make it mandatory. She said forcing people into a room wouldn't change their hearts. After one case, a new resident stayed behind. Pakistani-American, Northwestern grad, top of her class. She told me she'd nearly quit medicine after being harassed during her internship. Hearing my story had convinced her to stay. "Does it ever stop hurting?" she asked. I told her, "You just get better at focusing on the work instead of the words." At Marcus's retirement party, he pulled me aside and handed me a thick folder. Inside, 15 years of documented harassment incidents against staff, ignored and buried. He'd started collecting them after his own daughter, a black nurse, quit the profession because of abuse. My case had pushed him to finally hand them to the state board. Within a month, new policies were in place. Mandatory reporting, real consequences for hospitals that ignored it. Jackson emailed from California. He'd transferred after the trial, studying social work, speaking to other campuses about hazing and racial harassment. He ended with an apology for being too drunk, too scared to stand up to Josh sooner. Near the holidays, Chris mailed me his first real legal brief, a proposal for stronger protections for healthcare workers facing harassment. His handwriting was shaky, but the arguments were sharp. A state senator was already interested in turning it into a bill. 6 months after the trials, I opened my Uber app for the first time since that night. My first passengers were 3 international students heading home from the library at midnight. They apologized for keeping me out late. I told them never to apologize for chasing their dreams. This country was built by people who stayed up late working for something better. As I drove, the stained prayer bead in my pocket caught the streetlight, dark against the clean ones. Some things you can't wash away. They stay with you, part of who you are. When we reached their stop, one student noticed my hospital badge. "Are you the doctor from the news? The one who saved someone who was cruel to you?" he asked. I nodded. He smiled and said an old Urdu phrase my grandmother used to say, "God sees all good deeds, even when people don't." After they left, I sat for a moment, holding my mother's beads, thinking of everything that had happened. Then I switched the app back on and took the next ride. Because that's what you do. You keep going. You keep helping. You keep choosing who you are, no matter what the world tries to make you. I'll never forget the night my Uber passengers mocked my accent, my religion, and even my job. Right up until they realized I was the only person who could save their friend's life. That was 3 months ago. Yesterday, I found out Josh's dad was arrested for witness tampering. Poetic, right? Back then, I'd been driving Uber for about half a year. a mindless side gig to distract me from losing one of my favorite patients. It was 2 a.m. when I got a pickup request from a frat party. For college guys, clearly drunk, piling into my car. One of them, they called him Chris, was clutching a bar towel around his hand. It was soaked through with blood. They had no idea that in just a few hours, I'd be starting my shift as chief of trauma surgery at the exact hospital they wanted to go to. Chris slumped in the back while his friend Josh jumped in the passenger seat, cranked my radio, and smirked when I asked him to keep pressure on the wound. "Relax, Abdul," he said, deliberately misreading my name from the Uber app. "It's just a beer bottle cut. Pretty sure they don't even have hospitals where you're from." I didn't answer. My gut was telling me this wasn't a surface wound. The blood was spurting in a way I recognized far too well. But arguing with drunk strangers wasn't going to help, and I couldn't examine him properly while driving. Josh noticed my prayer beads hanging from the mirror and started swinging them around like a toy. "Think these will magically heal him?" He laughed. When I reached for them, he yanked them away. "What? Need M to find the hospital? Just follow the GPS, buddy." Then he tossed them into the back seat, where they landed in Chris's blood. My mother had given me those beads before she passed away. He didn't stop there. He rifled through my glove compartment without asking, pulled out one of my medical journals, and laughed. "Look at this, picture books about bodies. Probably trying to learn English from the diagrams. Hey, driver, can you even read these big words?" Meanwhile, I was watching Chris's skin turn pale. He had maybe 30 minutes before critical blood loss. I sped up, but Josh grabbed the wheel. "Slow down, terrorist. This isn't your third world country." In the back, Chris's breathing was becoming shallow. His friend Jackson caught me adjusting the mirror to keep an eye on him and sneered, "Stop staring at us, creep." Then he found my hospital ID wedged between the seats. "St. Mary's Hospital Janitor," he scoffed, not even reading the title. They kept at it, mocking my accent, making jokes about immigrants taking jobs, one-star reviewing me in real time, even saying they'd report me for human trafficking because I looked suspicious. Then Chris vomited blood all over my seat. His friends laughed. Josh pulled out his phone to film it, narrating about the worst Uber ride ever while zooming in on my face. But when I heard that gasping, the agonal breathing that comes right before cardiac arrest, I knew I couldn't wait. I pulled over. Josh shoved me back. "Don't touch him. You'll make it worse." I ignored him. Chris's pulse was gone at the wrist. The cut had hit the radial artery deeper than they thought. I yanked my belt off, started making a tourniquet. Jackson punched me in the shoulder, yelling about taxi driver medical knowledge. Then Chris's body went limp. His eyes rolled back. Jackson's voice cracked. "He's not breathing right." I pushed past them and checked his neck, thready pulse, sky-high heart rate. His trachea was shifting to the left. Collapsed lung. If I didn't act, he'd be dead in under 2 minutes. I grabbed my keys, a pen from my clipboard, and hand sanitizer. "Your friend's lung has collapsed from aspirated blood," I told them. "I can save him, or you can explain to his parents why you stopped me." Josh started filming again, until my ID badge fell face up onto the pavement. Dr. Rashid Hassan, Chief of Trauma Surgery. And for the first time that night, all 3 of them shut up. The morning after the incident, I walked into Chris's hospital room. He was awake but groggy, his parents sitting on either side of him. His mom, Lisa, stood the moment she saw me, gratitude written all over her face. But before she could speak, the door slammed open. Josh stormed in. He jabbed a finger toward me like I was some criminal. "He nearly killed Chris," he told his parents, his voice dripping with self-righteousness. "Did surgery outside a hospital without consent. Reckless. He should lose his license." And, of course, his phone was out, recording me again. Chris just stared at the ceiling, looking lost. A few minutes later, Marcus, the head of security, pulled me into the hallway. On his tablet, he showed me the ER security footage, Josh shoving me, calling me a terrorist, after he already knew who I was. Marcus said he'd filed an incident report and suggested I press assault charges. I wasn't sure yet. 2 days later, I was in the cafeteria grabbing lunch when 3 nurses approached my table, whispering about that Uber thing they'd heard through the grapevine. A Pakistani resident joined us, scrolling through his phone to show me Josh's Instagram posts. Josh was claiming I'd performed unnecessary surgery just to play hero, tagging the hospital so everyone would see. That afternoon, Lisa asked to meet privately in a conference room. Her hands shook as she told me Josh's father, a powerful attorney, was threatening to sue both me and the hospital. She showed me screenshots of Josh's Instagram story. He'd cut the video so it looked like I'd just attacked Chris with a pen for no reason. None of the racism, none of the shoving. Just me looking like a madman. The next day, Emily, my department head, called me into her office. She slid a folder across the desk, Josh's formal complaint to the medical board. In it was his edited video, starting only at the moment I began the needle decompression. Everything else, gone. Later that week, Chris asked to see me while his parents stepped out. He said he remembered more than Josh realized, including Josh yanking the steering wheel while I was driving. He tried to write it down for me, but his right hand shook from nerve damage. The pen slipped out of his grasp, clattering to the floor. A week after it all went down, Uber's legal department called. Josh had filed a safety complaint, claiming I'd abandoned my car to assault a passenger. They suspended my account on the spot. I hadn't planned to drive again, but the lie still burned. That night at home, I sat at my kitchen table, rubbing alcohol in one hand, my mother's prayer beads in the other. No matter how hard I scrubbed with an old toothbrush, the bloodstains wouldn't fade. My mom had told me to help people, even if they treated me like dirt. Now the beads would carry this reminder forever. The next week, I went to the police station to give my statement to Detective Morrison. She showed me something surprising. Parts of Josh's own video actually helped my case. You could see him taking my property, blocking medical care, shoving me. But she warned me, pressing charges might just provoke his father's connections. 3 days later, Jackson, one of the guys from that night, found me in the parking garage after my shift. He kept glancing over his shoulder before speaking. "I've got the full video," he whispered. "Everything. From the start." It showed every slur, every shove, every threat in the car. He said watching Chris struggle in rehab made him feel sick for keeping quiet. His hands trembled as he passed me his phone, and I stood there watching the footage as cars drove past us in the dim light. The next morning, Lisa called again. Her private investigator had found 2 other students Josh had harassed, both international. Both had filed complaints, but the university had quietly convinced them to drop it. She emailed me the documents. This wasn't a one-off. This was a pattern. 2 weeks after it all began, I checked on Chris during physical therapy. His right hand couldn't even hold a tennis ball for more than 3 seconds before dropping it. He tried writing his name, the pen rolled right out of his grip. He'd been pre-med, wanted to be a surgeon like me. Now he couldn't button his own shirt. The therapist kept adjusting his grip strength meter, but the numbers barely moved. At 5 pounds of pressure, Chris started crying. He admitted he'd heard Josh make the same kinds of jokes about foreign students all semester, and had even laughed along sometimes to fit in. Now, he said, the injury felt like punishment for staying silent. He told me Josh had driven another student out of chemistry class by making bomb jokes every time the guy walked in. That same day, Emily called me to her office again. A certified letter from the state medical board sat on her desk. They were opening a formal investigation into my unauthorized medical intervention. 10 days to hand over every scrap of documentation. She said Josh's dad had already been on the phone with board members. 5 days later, Jackson texted me, "You need to see this." Screenshots from a frat group chat. Josh bragging about ruining my career. Talking about calling immigration to report me as suspicious. Even outlining a story to make me sound dangerous. His frat brothers encouraged him, offering to file false reports too. 3 weeks after the night in my car, I was walking through the hospital lobby when the doors flew open and in stormed Josh's father. Attorney Patterson was waving papers and yelling about foreign doctors treating American citizens without permission. Security moved in, But Patterson just got louder, raving about terrorists in the medical system. He shoved a cease and desist order at Marcus, demanding I be removed from Chris's case. Marcus told him I wasn't Chris's doctor. That made him angrier. People in the waiting room started recording. Eventually, security had to physically escort him outside, where he continued screaming at Marcus for another 10 minutes. That night, I sat in my car after work, gripping the steering wheel. My hands were shaking. I could feel eyes on me in every surgery that week. Patients requesting different doctors, nurses hesitating just a little longer before handing me instruments. The next morning, Lisa called and asked if I could meet her, and a man she introduced as David Sterling. He was an attorney who specialized in hate crime cases, and he'd already done his homework. Spread across the table were printouts of Josh's social media history from the last 3 years. Lisa slid over a stack of text messages between Chris and Josh. They went back an entire year. It started with jokes about accents, but month by month, the tone got darker. Josh had sent Chris pictures of other international students with captions so vile I could barely look at them, along with threats about what he'd do if they ever outperformed him in class. One message from 6 months ago made my stomach turn. Josh bragged about getting an Indian student expelled by planting alcohol in his dorm room. Chris had replied with laughing emojis. Josh responded, "Foreigners are easy. Nobody believes them." 2 days later, I was in Chris's hospital room when he asked for my help making a video statement. His right hand shook so badly from the nerve damage that he couldn't hold his phone steady. I propped it up on the bedside table. For 20 minutes, Chris spoke about that night, and about the way Josh had treated international students for years. He described how Josh had framed that Indian student, how the entire fraternity knew, and how Josh kept a list of targets with instructions for brothers to harass them. His scars from surgery were visible in the shot, his medical chart in the background. He ended by apologizing for staying silent, saying his own injury was nothing compared to the damage Josh had done to others. The very next day, Emily called me into her office again. Another official letter was waiting. My hearing with the medical board was set for 2 weeks away, lightning speed for them. Emily told me Patterson had pulled strings to rush it. Now they were combing through every surgery I'd done in the last year, 43 cases in total, looking for anything they could twist into a pattern of recklessness. They'd already zeroed in on 2 routine post-op infections from months ago, even though both had been resolved without complication. 3 days later, Jackson texted me from an unfamiliar number. He wanted to meet in a coffee shop downtown. In the back corner, wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap, he slid his phone across the table. The video was 43 minutes long. It showed everything. Josh punching me twice while I tried to save Chris, threatening to ruin me if I didn't stop. Jackson kept glancing at the door, telling me Patterson had already called his parents with threats of a lawsuit if he talked to police. He also showed me screenshots of Josh bragging about getting a high school chemistry teacher fired 2 years ago. Her crime? Giving him a D. His father claimed she made anti-Christian remarks. 3 separate investigations cleared her. But she never taught again. Jackson transferred the video to my phone and slipped out the back without finishing his coffee. The next morning during rounds, I noticed Dr. Patel avoiding my eyes. 2 other international doctors suddenly had schedule conflicts for our case reviews. Eventually, Patel pulled me into a supply closet and whispered that Patterson's lawyers had approached the department chair, pushing for an audit of every foreign doctor's credentials. 3 colleagues had already been told to resubmit proof of their licenses, even after a decade of practicing. For weeks after the incident, Chris came in for his follow-up. The nerve conduction test showed no improvement. He could barely hold a pen, and the tremor made writing impossible. He looked at me and asked, point blank, if he'd ever be able to be a surgeon like he'd dreamed since middle school. I had to tell him no. After he left for therapy, Lisa stayed behind and broke down in my office. Through tears, she admitted she'd been warned, years ago, by Josh's own mother to keep Chris away from him. She showed me donation records. The Pattersons had given $2 million to the hospital's new cardiac wing. Suddenly, it made sense why the board hesitated to ban Josh from hospital property until the video surfaced. The next day, While I was in the OR for a gallbladder removal, one of my mother's blood-stained prayer beads slipped from my pocket onto the sterile field. The circulating nurse asked about it while anesthesia worked, so I told her the story. She nodded, but I noticed her phone was propped up against her water bottle, recording. Later I learned she'd been secretly filming staff for a documentary on immigrant healthcare workers, without getting proper consent. That night, she posted a clip of me talking about my mother's beads on social media. The following week, I met David Sterling at his law office, a place that smelled like old leather and strong coffee. He laid out statutes showing how Josh's actions met every requirement for felony assault with a bias enhancement. 5 to 7 years in prison, potentially. But then he showed me the arsenal Patterson had assembled: 3 law firms, a PR team that specialized in cleaning up the reputations of wealthy families. They were already spinning a story about Josh being traumatized by watching his friend get injured, painting me as the overreacting foreign doctor. David said they'd likely offer a plea deal, misdemeanor disorderly conduct, no jail time, in exchange for dropping the hate crime angle. One afternoon in the cafeteria, I overheard 2 administrators at the next table discussing my case. One said the board might ask me to take voluntary leave until the legal mess blew over, because the Pattersons were threatening to pull funding for the new ER expansion. The other pointed out that voluntary leave often became permanent once the media attention faded. They didn't even realize I was sitting 3 feet away. Meanwhile, Marcus had been working behind the scenes. He brought the board investigator security footage from the last 5 years of my career, and incident reports from 2 other hospitals where Josh had been banned for harassing nurses and using racial slurs toward cleaning staff. Patterson had managed to seal those records, but Marcus had connections who kept copies. And then, out of nowhere, a filmmaker contacted me. She said she'd been digging into Josh's history and found 3 more victims, all international. A Pakistani Uber driver Josh accused of assault when told not to smoke in the car. A Chinese graduate student he accused of cheating after she rejected him. A Mexican restaurant worker he claimed had stolen his wallet when they refused to serve him after closing. Same pattern every time. Harassment, fabricated accusations, and then his father making it all disappear. 6 weeks after that night, I was finally sitting down for dinner when my pager went off. Code blue. Emergency department. When I got there, my heart sank. Chris. He'd swallowed an entire bottle of painkillers. The note they found. It said he couldn't live knowing he'd never become the surgeon he'd dreamed of being, and that he couldn't bear the guilt of staying silent while Josh hurt people. We worked on him fast. Naloxone. Chest compressions. I intubated him, with the same hands that had already saved his life once before. While we were fighting for him, Josh was on Instagram, posting old smiling photos of the 2 of them, writing captions about how Chris had been mentally unstable ever since that so-called doctor ruined him with a botched roadside surgery. The next morning, my phone blew up. Someone had leaked the medical board's preliminary report to the local news. Channel 10 had my name plastered across the screen, mispronouncing it every single time, while showing the inside of my bloody Uber. They kept asking if foreign doctors should even be allowed to perform emergency procedures on American streets. The timing wasn't a coincidence. Patterson's law firm had dropped that leak right before my scheduled defense presentation to the board. Emily called me in. Half the department heads were there. She played the meeting minutes from the day before, Patterson himself standing in front of them, threatening to pull $20 million in annual donations and slap the hospital with a $50 million lawsuit if they didn't fire me. The room had split, older members terrified of the legal fallout, younger ones warning that giving in would set a dangerous precedent. 3 days later, I went to see Chris in the ICU. His wrists were wrapped in white gauze. The sight pulled me straight back to that bar towel in the back of my car. He looked at me and asked, "Why did you save me?" Twice. After everything I did, everything I said. I told him what my mother taught me before she passed, that healing has to exist apart from judgment, that my job isn't to decide who deserves to live. He broke down sobbing so hard the monitors started alarming, and nurses came running in thinking something was wrong. That night, my inbox started filling up. Other Uber drivers had seen the news and were sharing their own stories about drunk college kids treating them like servants or worse. One sent me dash cam footage from 2 weeks before my incident. The same fraternity guys, forcing an older Pakistani driver to sing the national anthem to prove he wasn't a terrorist. His hands shook on the wheel while they laughed. Another had audio of Josh telling his friends they should mess with foreign drivers because nobody will believe them. 2 months of legal meetings and depositions dragged by before Jackson finally testified at the medical board hearing. Patterson tried to have the video thrown out as illegally recorded, but Jackson just hit play on his phone, holding it up so all 12 board members could watch. There was Josh, physically blocking me from helping Chris, shoving me, calling me a terrorist, sneering that my dirty hands shouldn't touch an American. You could even hear him laughing about the 1-star review while Chris's breathing was collapsing. The next week, Josh was arrested after David took all of it, the video, Marcus's statements, the security reports, to a grand jury. It took Patterson less than an hour to post $100,000 bail. He walked straight to the courthouse steps, suit perfectly tailored, and told the cameras his son was being persecuted for questioning an unlicensed roadside procedure. He called me a stranger who attacked his son's friend with household objects. Lisa's investigator kept digging. She uncovered 3 sealed settlements from Josh's prep school and early college years. One victim broke his NDA to say Josh had put him in the hospital over a parking spot. Patterson's money had erased the charges, along with the kid's scholarship when he considered pressing them anyway. Then more victims came forward, people who'd woken up in hospital beds to Patterson's lawyers holding settlement checks in one hand and threats in the other. I came home one night to find an eviction notice taped to my door. 5 years without a single missed payment, and suddenly my landlord was mumbling about media attention and property values. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my mother's prayer beads, still stained with Chris's blood, wondering if standing up for what's right was worth losing everything. Then Chris started a blog, The Truth About That Night. Within a week, 10,000 people were reading his daily posts, screenshots of Josh's old group texts filled with slurs I won't repeat, photos of other students Josh had targeted, a growing timeline of violence even Patterson's PR machine couldn't bury. The medical board finally set my formal hearing. Patterson himself came to cross-examine me, smug in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. He tried to paint me as a rogue doctor who played hero outside proper protocol, asking if roadside surgery with office supplies was part of my foreign medical training. Dr. Williams, one of the board members, cut him off. He graduated summa cum laude from Johns Hopkins, she said flatly. Not exactly foreign. Then she asked Patterson if he had any medical qualifications at all. He ignored her, pulled out a thick folder, and began laying photos across the table. My family in Pakistan, my bank statements, my phone records. He pointed to a picture of my cousin at a rally in Karachi, trying to tie me to extremist groups. The rally was for education reform. The board chair kept interrupting, asking what any of this had to do with my treatment of Chris. Patterson wouldn't stop. He read from an investigation into what mosque I attended, how often I sent money to my relatives, even showing surveillance shots of me walking into the Islamic Center where I volunteer to teach science to kids. And I couldn't help thinking, what kind of power, what kind of reach does it take to dig that deep into a man's private life? All to twist a narrative? 10 weeks after that night in my car, it was finally Emily's turn to testify at the hearing. She walked in with 3 boxes, each one full of letters from patients I'd treated over the past 5 years at St. Mary's. She read snippets aloud. Families talking about how I'd stayed hours after my shift just to comfort them, how I'd refused to leave until their loved ones stabilized. Then she pulled up charts, my perfect disciplinary record, the highest patient satisfaction scores in the trauma department, over 2,000 surgeries performed with outcomes that beat national averages. During a break, I slipped back to the ER to cover incoming cases. We were short-staffed. A Pakistani family rushed in with their son, who'd taken a bad fall from his bike. His eyes went wide when he saw me. His mother gripped my hand and thanked me in Urdu for standing up to people like Patterson, saying I gave her hope for her children's future here. The boy asked if I was the doctor from the news who saved the mean college kid. I just nodded while examining his broken wrist. That afternoon, my phone started blowing up. The filmmaker had dropped her trailer online. 3 other international students on camera, describing how Josh had harassed them over the past year. One young woman said she dropped out after he followed her home multiple times. Within hours, the trailer hit 1 million views. The university president called an emergency meeting. News outlets started connecting the dots. Patterson's big donations to the school always came right after complaints about Josh mysteriously vanished. The next morning, Chris appeared on a big screen in the hearing room, calling in from the psychiatric facility where he'd been for 2 months. He looked worn down, but spoke with complete clarity. He told them about Josh's game, making foreign students quit school, and the notebook he kept with actual point values for different harassment tactics. He admitted he'd laughed along at first, drunk and stupid, until the night in my car. He held up Josh's notebook to the camera. Patterson jumped to his feet, shouting, not realizing his mic was still live. "That sand N should go back where he came from." It echoed through the room. Within minutes, the clip was all over Twitter under the hashtag #PattersonExposed. 3 board members who'd backed him walked out on the spot, and 2 more released public statements cutting ties. A week later, the hospital board voted on my job. Emily had already lined up pledges from 17 donors to replace Patterson's funding. The vote was unanimous to keep me. The board chair apologized to my face for how the investigation was handled and announced new policies to protect staff from donor harassment. 3 months after it all began, I was back on regular rotations, no security escorts. Protesters still gathered outside, some waving signs with Patterson's face and his own racist quotes, but they were outnumbered by supporters. My coworkers formed a shield around me walking to my car. Nurses I barely knew brought me food. The janitor who'd cleaned my Uber that night made it his mission to walk me to the garage every evening. Then Lisa called. Her voice was trembling. She wanted me to meet her at a coffee shop. She said Chris had been planning another attempt. His therapist had found notes about not deserving to live. She thought I was the only one who might reach him. She handed me a letter Chris had written but never sent. Pages of apologies for that night. The psychiatric facility was surrounded by woods and walking paths. I found Chris in the garden, doing hand exercises with a rubber ball, his fingers struggling to close around it. He showed me his progress chart. Barely any improvement in months. He'd switched from pre-med to patient advocacy, typing one-handed about discrimination in healthcare. His walls were covered in printed emails from students Josh had hurt, all forgiving him and encouraging his new path. 3 weeks later, my coworkers started sending me the same link. Josh had posted a video from his parents' house, wearing a MAGA hat, holding up my hospital photo, calling me a terrorist who'd taken over American medicine. Within 2 hours, it had 12,000 views. By that afternoon, the FBI had called David about federal charges for terroristic threats. Patterson tried to delete it, but screenshots were everywhere. The next day, David arrived in my office with a folder. Inside were posts from a private fraternity group called Border Patrol. For 3 years, they'd been following international students, photographing them, and posting their reactions. Every time Josh made someone cry or drop a class, he posted a victory update. The university expelled him that afternoon and suspended the entire fraternity. His father was reportedly screaming in the dean's office about lawsuits. During a long heart surgery 2 days later, one of my colleagues mentioned that nurses from Pakistan and India had started reporting years of harassment. The hospital board met that weekend and passed new anti-discrimination protocols. They insisted on naming them the Hassan Protocols, even though I asked them not to. Marcus began training security on recognizing harassment patterns, and Emily added mandatory bias training for all staff. For months after that night, Jackson called to say he was transferring to Ohio State to get away from Josh's circle. Before leaving, he sat down for a 6-hour deposition, describing years of Josh's escalating behavior and the silence that surrounded it. That Friday, I went to the mosque for the first time since this all began. The prayer hall was packed. I sat in the back, trying not to be noticed. The imam spoke about patience during trials, about how justice comes to those who wait with faith. Afterward, 3 other doctors approached me, sharing their own stories of patients refusing their care because of their accents or skin color. A surgeon from Syria showed me the death threats he'd gotten after a patient Googled his birthplace. We stood in the parking lot for an hour, sharing things we'd never dared to say out loud. The next week, Patterson filed a motion to have the judge removed, because she'd been born in Korea. He claimed immigrants stick together, and she couldn't be fair to his American son. The judge let him finish, then added his outburst to the official record as further evidence of his discriminatory behavior. She denied the motion and warned him that another display like that would land him in contempt. That Monday, Chris arrived in court with his brace on, signing in with his good hand. The damaged one hung at his side, a permanent reminder. Every time Josh turned to look at him, Chris would raise it just slightly, as if to remind him of exactly what he'd taken. As the trial date loomed, my nightmares got worse. I'd wake up seeing Josh's face, hearing him laugh as he dangled my mother's prayer beads. Some nights, I dreamed about Chris bleeding out in my back seat while Josh held me back. Dr. Martinez prescribed sleeping pills, but I didn't take them. I couldn't risk being groggy if the hospital called me in. She helped me confront the guilt I still carried. Not from what I'd done that night, but from staying silent when Josh mocked my accent and my faith. By the third day of trial, David finally rolled the footage the jury had been waiting for, Josh's unedited video from that night in my Uber. The room went silent as it played. On the screen, Josh twirled my mother's prayer beads between his fingers, smirking, while Chris bled out in the background. You could hear my voice, calm but urgent, begging to help. And you could hear Josh calling me a terrorist, blocking me from touching his friend. One juror started crying when Josh laughed about Chris vomiting blood being great content for social media. Another bolted for the restroom, looking physically ill. The judge had to call a recess. The next morning, Josh took the stand, suit pressed, voice smooth, talking about how cancel culture was destroying his life. He claimed the video was out of context, that he was simply scared for Chris that night. David didn't let him breathe. Screenshot after screenshot from the Border Patrol group, Josh bragging about previous harassment campaigns against international students. One post showed him celebrating how he'd made an Indian pre-med student quit school after months of taunting. Another was practically a tutorial on how to make foreign classmates feel unwelcome without triggering official complaints. Then came the moment I'll never forget. The judge called a recess, and I saw Patterson lean over to Jackson 2 rows behind us. Minutes later, in the courthouse hallway, security cameras caught Patterson counting out $100 bills and shoving them into Jackson's chest while hissing about loyalty and protecting real Americans from foreign trash. Jackson backed away, hands up. Patterson shoved him against the wall. That's when 2 federal marshals closed in and cuffed him for witness tampering. Right there in front of everyone. Patterson screamed about protecting his son from terrorists and how I should be the one in handcuffs. With Patterson hauled off, the defense unraveled fast. They tried to argue Josh was too drunk to form intent, until David produced Facebook posts from earlier that same day, hours before he'd had a single drink, recruiting friends to mess with anyone with an accent at that night's party. The judge allowed it as proof of premeditation. They tried the diminished capacity route next. Their own expert admitted Josh's blood alcohol level was nowhere near high enough to prevent him from knowing right from wrong. On day 4, Chris took the stand. His damaged hand shook as he tried to hold his notes. He stared directly at Josh and talked about wanting to be a surgeon since he was 12, and how now he couldn't hold a scalpel steady for more than 10 seconds. His voice broke as he described nightmares about bleeding out in my car, the 2 suicide attempts, the guilt of what he'd done that night. He said Josh's hatred hadn't just attacked me. It had destroyed his future too. That night, my colleagues ambushed me in the break room with food from every country represented in our department. We swapped stories about discrimination, things most of us had never dared say out loud. Marcus even brought years of hospital security footage documenting other incidents, and Dr. Smith Rodriguez announced she was forming a task force to address systemic bias in healthcare. The next day, Josh's defense tried character witnesses. It backfired. His ex-girlfriend broke down describing a box under his bed filled with trophies. Prayer beads, a hijab, a yarmulke, stolen from people he'd harassed. She'd also seen photos on his phone of international students crying while Josh grinned beside them. His former roommate accidentally revealed Josh's point system for driving foreign students to drop classes or change majors. Then Lisa's investigator dropped the bomb. Josh's old journals from Patterson's storage unit. Page after page showed Patterson grooming his son since early adolescence, rewarding him for putting foreigners in their place, punishing him for showing kindness. One entry described Josh getting a new car for forcing an Indian student off the debate team through months of targeted harassment, step by step under his father's coaching. David closed strong, walking the jury through 5.5 months of evidence showing this wasn't drunken chaos, but a calculated pattern of hate. The defense's final argument felt desperate, blaming alcohol, peer pressure, Patterson, anything to avoid Josh's own responsibility. The jury deliberated for 3 days. I worked my shifts, but every interaction felt heavy. I knew if Josh walked, it would tell every bigot in the country they could nearly kill someone for being foreign and get away with it. On day 2, Chris visited between therapy sessions. He showed me he could now hold a pen for almost 30 seconds. Progress from an experimental nerve stimulation treatment. He thanked me for saving him in my car, and for not giving up on him when I found him in that dorm bathroom with pills scattered everywhere. By day 3, the jury was back, after only 3 hours. I stood in the back of the courtroom as the foreperson read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. Aggravated assault, ethnic intimidation, reckless endangerment, and the hate crime enhancement. Josh collapsed over the defense table, sobbing. Patterson, still out on bail, erupted in shouts about appeals, corrupt judges, and foreign influence, until security dragged him out again. 2 weeks later, at sentencing, the courtroom felt colder than usual. The judge fixed her eyes on Josh while his mother sobbed a few rows back. One by one, she read victim impact statements, letters from hospital staff who'd been intimidated, harassed, and threatened by him. Her tone sharpened as she laid out his lifelong pattern of violence, noting 3 assault charges his father had buried with favors and money. She called him a danger to society, someone who had shown no hint of remorse throughout the trial. When she handed down the sentence, 5 to 7 years in state prison, Josh's knees buckled. Guards had to hold him upright. His mother screamed that this was my fault as court officers let her out. By the next morning, Patterson's most powerful allies at the hospital were scrambling to sever ties. Within 3 days, the medical board voted unanimously to erase every complaint he'd filed against me. They issued a formal apology and rolled out new anti-discrimination policies. The hospital's PR team sent press releases to every outlet, declaring their stance against hate crimes. 6 months later, the documentary crew called with news. Their film had just won an award at Sundance. They wanted me at the premiere. I almost turned it down until Chris called, insisting people needed to hear the truth from both of us. At the screening, he stood on stage, scarred hand visible, telling the crowd that staying silent makes you part of the problem. The room rose to its feet, clapping until the walls seemed to shake. I stayed in the back, blinking back tears. That week, a package arrived from Karachi. Prayer beads blessed at my family's mosque, sent by my aunt. Her note said the whole neighborhood had heard our story, and that my mother would have been proud. Standing up to injustice, she wrote, is exactly what she raised you to do. I hung them in my office beside her photo. 2 months later, Patterson was back in court, this time for witness tampering and conspiracy to obstruct justice. Prosecutors revealed evidence of him paying off witnesses in 3 other cases involving Josh. One victim had been pushed down a staircase in high school, another assaulted at a campus party. Each had been silenced with payouts and threats. The judge called it a pattern of corruption spanning nearly a decade. Meanwhile, Chris used his settlement from the university to launch a nonprofit for hate crime victims, offering legal aid and advocacy. He asked me to join the board, reviewing medical cases where discrimination had shaped patient care. His hand would never fully recover, but he adapted, using specialized grips to write and type. One night, I decided to drive Uber again, just once. Near midnight, I picked up a young woman from the university library. She apologized 3 times for her accent before even telling me where she was going. I told her about my first year in America, how I'd practiced ordering coffee over and over, terrified someone would laugh. I told her her accent was part of her story, and she should never apologize for it. When she got out, she thanked me in Urdu, and I realized it was the first time I'd smiled in months. Patterson's verdict came while I was mid-surgery. 18 months in federal prison, plus permanent disbarment. The judge said his wealth had been the weapon enabling his son's violence, making him equally responsible. Within a week, his law firm collapsed as clients fled. 2 months into Josh's sentence, leaked prison calls hit the media. In one, he told his mother I'd ruined his life by not letting him die that night. In another, he called Chris weak for testifying. No remorse, no change. Then came the medical conference. 6 months after it all ended, I was halfway through a presentation on emergency procedures outside hospital settings when Chris walked onto the stage with a stack of folders. Using his adapted grip, he announced a new scholarship program for immigrant medical students. 20 full rides funded by lawsuit settlements. The first recipient, a Syrian refugee who'd been driving a taxi while waiting for his credentials to transfer. Healing, Chris told the audience, isn't just fixing bodies. It's fixing the systems that hurt people in the first place. Later, over coffee, he showed me a letter from Jackson. In therapy now, struggling to find the words to apologize. We talked about forgiveness, accountability, and how some scars never fade, but you learn to live with them. That night, I hung my mother's prayer beads back in my car. The stains were lighter now but still there. A quiet reminder of everything we survived, and why I'll never stop speaking up.